As I mentioned earlier on, most of what you've seen both in Europe and in the United States, that the fundamental laws and the procedures under which medicines are regulated were really brought into play as reactions to public health disasters where the population demanded that those who are in charge try to put into place systems that would keep those kinds of things from happening in the future. But I think we can also see, as I mentioned earlier on, there are times where in a much more prospective manner, legislators and others have sat down with people in the community, people in the regulatory authorities, and said, is there a way we might use regulation not to keep something bad from happening, but rather to try to create an incentive for something good to happen that just isn't happening with the market forces that are at play at this point in time. And so I just want to mention a couple of these particular laws that have been enacted, again, not in response to something bad that happened, but as a way to try to create an incentive for something happen, for a public health good to happen that is not being created by the incentives in the contemporary market. The first of these really happened in 1984 in the United States and in 2000 in the European Union, and that's known as the Orphan Drug Act. This is a special act that created tax incentives and other kinds of incentives for manufacturers who are willing to invest in trying to find treatments for what are known as orphan diseases. In the United States, these are diseases that occur in less than 200,000 Americans each year. As you can imagine, that is a very small market in the United States, and a market of that size really has not historically created the kind of incentives that companies and other institutions need in order to develop products for these diseases. But because of the incentives that were created under this legislation, this particular act has been one of the most successful acts in the history of drug regulation in the United States. Well over several hundred drugs have now been looked at, and many of those have been authorized to treat these particular diseases that only a small percentage of the population in the U.S. have. In 1984 also, the U.S. created the first pathway for generic drugs to get on the market. Prior to 1984, once a patent for a product had expired in the United States, if another company wanted to market that product, they had to basically do pretty much the same thing that the originator had done, because the clinical trials were actually the property of the originator company. But in 1984, Congress decided that, as is its job, how to balance goods, public health goods, and also the economic interests of various groups in the country. And they did this by creating a pathway for generic drugs to get on the U.S. market once the patent on the product had expired, that didn't require the company to redo the clinical trials, but allowed FDA to use what is known as bioequivalence, bioavailability, and other pharmacodynamic means to show that the generic product is behaving essentially the same as the originator product. This allowed for much greater competition on the market. It allowed for much cheaper forms of these drugs to be marketed. And as you know today, a large percentage, upwards to 70% of the products, medical products that are used in the United States are the generic forms of various medical products. And this all began with the amendments in 1984. Some of the more recent efforts in these kinds of activities include the pediatric drug incentives in 1997 in the United States and 2006 in Europe, to again address a need that the market simply was not incentivizing. And that is to do the studies to find out what are the appropriate doses for children for medicines, how to develop dosage forms for children, going back to what we learned in the 1930s with the crisis with sulfanilamide. You know, the incredible importance of getting the dosage form right, getting the dose right, learning the special safety issues that children have with drugs, particularly children whose bodies are maturing at different stages of their development from gestation through adulthood. But again, because the market is so small, these are issues that really have not been well addressed until the late 1990s, when some of this new legislation was brought into being. Also, in 2005 and in Europe, in 2007 in the US, special regulatory pathways for tropical medicine drugs to try to create incentives for manufacturers to develop products that might really never be used in the United States to any great degree, or might not be used in the European Union, but would indeed create these products for people in other parts of the world where perhaps the manufacturers, because of the market situations there, might not be willing to expend the effort and the expense to develop products for these neglected tropical diseases. We see the same thing now with discussions on incentives for antimicrobial resistance. So it gives you an idea, and most recently, the new pathway for biosimilars and biointerchangeables. I think you see here that the regulation of drugs is really a continuum. And as new technologies come forward, it is imperative that the law and the regulations and the pathways are there to allow these new technologies to be exploited so that people can indeed trust them, people can know that the benefits of these products outweigh their risks, that they do have a positive benefit to risk profile, that they are manufactured in a quality manner consistently, and that we are creating incentives, that we're not creating hurdles, but that we're creating incentives for new technologies to address the issues of groups in our community who perhaps because of their size simply do not create the market incentive that other groups of much greater size in the community do create. So in summary, I hope in our time here together today, you've seen that medicines regulation as we know it now in high-income countries is fundamentally a product of the incredible progress in biology, medicine, technology in the 20th century, and some of the unexpected toxicities that these incredible new technologies have also brought. I hope you also see that regulation also reflects the public's desire on these particular products that they have to, quite honestly, at the end of the day, often bet their life on, that indeed there has been an independent assessor, an independent regulator of that product's benefits and risks, and that indeed there is an acceptable benefit-risk profile that the patient and the practitioner can know about and can depend upon. As you've seen, regulation now focuses on safety, efficacy, and manufacturing quality, and it encompasses the life cycle of the product, and it is something that is a continuum that continues to expand to take in new technologies that are now available. It is a tool for helping facilitate drug development also by creating incentives when the market does not. Thank you very much.